guess just our culture, our world now is like, I'll just call my attorney. And I think it's also important to hire the correct attorney, because just because they're attorney, like if they're good at divorces, they're probably not any good at insurance claims.
It's the doctor theory, right? Like your pediatrician might not know how to do spinal surgery.
Yes.
Right?
Welcome to this edition of the Whole Truth Podcast. Today, our special guest is Daniel Robosky. Did I say that right?
You did.
Daniel, take a second, introduce yourself.
My name's Daniel Robosky. I am the founder of Robosky Consulting, which is a PA firm. And then we have a fractional operations company called Quantify Partners that I am also the founder of.
Let's for the purpose of our guest, let's kind of talk about that PA firm. What you do, because there's some value that you've actually already helped us on a couple of claims, and some values that maybe customers need to understand, because insurance is insurance, and long days of contractors just getting it approved relatively easy, and now there's a lot more legal loopholes and that kind of stuff. So this is kind of where your expertise come in.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances in all of that, right? So I actually got into the public adjusting side for the exact same reason that you just kind of listed. Was I was working for a contractor, and we were struggling to get our invoices paid. And it was right about the time that a lot of these states implemented the unlicensed practice of public adjusting laws. And so we were walking up to this line where we could argue up to, and the carriers knew where that line was as contractors, and they said, cool, kick rocks. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to go get my public adjuster's license, and knowing nothing really about it at the time, except that I knew that I could argue more on the behalf of contractors, and could carry these in and actually get these invoices paid. What I learned after that was that nobody knows what the heck a public adjuster is, and people treat property insurance claims the same in their head as they do automobile claims. Those are the two biggest issues that we're constantly competing with. So the down and dirty easy answer is that a public adjuster is your advocate. So they are going to fight for you against your insurance company to make sure that you're properly indemnified. That's where it gets messy, because people are greedy, right? And so a lot of PAs for years were going around anywhere in the country and be like, we're going to maximize your claim. We're going to get stuff bought, and they owe you for this whole thing. And, even if they didn't owe for the whole roof, or maybe it was just literally just collateral damage or whatever it was, and these guys were going out trying to get everything bought. So they gave our side of the industry a really bad name. But they also weren't taking any time to educate the insured. And so we have a lot of people, even to this day, geographically, it's massively different, right, in how we approach people. But the amount of times that I have to have the conversation of, well, no, your rate's not going up because you're filing a claim. It's not you didn't wreck your car. Right. So rates are determined by zip code and the amount of perils that happen in that zip code, and they're gauging their risks and all that. But the whole point of bringing in a public adjuster, or even an attorney in most cases, and that's another kind of misnomer too, is that people think if they bring in an attorney, it's going legal. An attorney is going to treat the claim the same way that we do, unless it needs to go to litigation, which very rarely does that happen. Educating people on what we can do is really just more about saying, we're going to take all this off your plate so you don't have to stress over it. The carrier is going to try and put you in a position where you don't know the answer to the question, or you're going to overtalk it, or you're going to get nervous. You're going to be like, well, I've seen that leak there for months, and they're going to find a way to not pay. So it's good to have advocates on your side, especially advocates that work well with contractors. So that's a very long-winded answer to what should be a simple question to be answered, but unfortunately it's not.
So just so the people that aren't real familiar, public adjuster, as a roofer, I call it a PA, because when you do have a claim, the insurance company is going to send out their own claim adjuster. So like you were saying, more somebody in your corner. Now, as a company, we try to do everything we can to help the customer, make sure the documentation is proper, all that kind of stuff. But there is times that it does come out to where the public adjuster, quite frankly, has to take it over. But we're at in a process where you're at. Like, where is the spot where a PA should help a customer with a claim compared to an attorney? Because sometimes I guess just our culture, our world now is like, I'll just call my attorney. And I think it's also important to hire the correct attorney, because just because they're attorney, like if they're good at divorces, they're probably not any good at insurance claims.
It's the doctor theory, right? Like your pediatrician might not know how to do spinal surgery.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So from a claim handling perspective, a PA and a lawyer are essentially the same. The fees are generally the same. The capacity for arguments the same. The way they structure their argument may be a little bit different, because they'll use some legalese and things like that, because they can. We think of PAs as like policy experts, where the lawyers are the legality side of it. So they're looking at everything from a legal perspective, and they're always prepping a file in the event that it has to go to litigation. They're prepping it from the beginning like that. We do the same, but we're just doing it from a different angle. So we're focusing very, very heavily on policy interpretation and policy language, where they're looking at the legality from state statutes and things like that. Not that we don't look at those, but we don't weigh in as heavily on those things. But essentially they're the same. And it's more so about who's available to you, right? Because to your point, a lot of people know a lawyer, but it doesn't mean they're a first party insurance claim specialist, right? That's a pretty niche thing. And every public adjuster, that's their specialty. And it's the interesting is we take the same exam in most states as the adjuster on the carrier side. So, because and I probably to expand on it a little bit, the carrier has the ability to have their own in-house adjusters, and then they have TPAs. So they'll have third-party adjusters that are for a different firm, and you've seen them, Sedgwick and Engel Martin and whoever, EFI Global, just insert 100. So those guys are usually in the same boat that we are, but they're going to get fed from the carrier, and they're working on the carrier's behalf, where we are always working on the insured's behalf. You can't be dual licensed. So you can't be licensed to work on the carrier side and the insured side. You have to pick one or the other. So we always just err on the side of the insured, because we like advocating for people.
Right. So in what is good and what is bad, I guess, about the Indiana law that is beneficial to either, is it more beneficial towards the homeowner or the insurance company?
The carrier, definitely. In Indiana is probably one of the worst states, and not necessarily in the way that the policy is written, but so you take a state like Texas or Florida, where they have what's called bad faith statutes, and it's essentially exactly what it sounds like. If the carrier's acting in bad faith, you have a legal ramification for that. And most states have a list of 20, 30 things that can fall under what is considered bad faith. Negligence on the carrier's behalf, improper investigations, the bullying of a client. There's a really long list. Indiana has 3. And they're so hard to prove. One of them is blatantly, and I'm going to word it wrong, but the essence is the same. Blatantly denying a claim where there should be a claim. But again, that becomes super subjective, right? The bullying thing exists here as well, where it's like they're trying to force an insured into taking a settlement, even though they know there's more. And off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank on the third one, but they're super, super hard to enforce here, because they're worded so very specifically, and they lack ambiguity. So every insurance policy in the country has verbiage in there that says ambiguity is supposed to err on the side of the insured at all times. If there's a question, it should err on the side of the insured. Indiana's bad faith laws remove the ambiguity out of the conversation and lean it towards the carriers. So you guys the carriers can always stand on that, going, well, they can push all they want. They have no way to prove bad faith, because there's only 3 qualifying factors in this state. So it's tough. It's tough here.
Wow. Okay.
As a matter of fact, I think there's only like 5 lawyers in the entire state that will take on bad faith claims in Indiana that are local to Indiana.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So it's a mixed bag, man. It's tough, because you can only argue so far.
Right.
And then there's states where representation isn't even legal. Like, we can't, from a PA perspective, like we can't practice in Arkansas and Alabama. So you have to hire a lawyer to do it. And a lot of lawyers don't want to mess with it because of the way the laws are written. So while there is a national entity that oversees all this stuff, the states have the ability to manipulate it at their own level. And a lot of states get it right, but you have a handful of states that make it really, really hard on the insured to get indemnified appropriately.
So what are some steps that a homeowner or a good contractor can take when you're dealing with a claim kind of, I guess, early on, just to set the customer up for the highest level of success, the best chance, I guess, to be successful?
Train your guys to understand what is actual storm damage, not just damage, right? Because, and what I'm about to say is going to seem counterintuitive, but just because it's damage doesn't mean it's the carrier's responsibility to pay for it.
Correct.
And that's a thing that's really hard for a lot of contractors to get through their training process to their guys, because also a lot of these sales guys, their livelihood depends on selling a roof, right? And so they'll go out and they'll find one that's got 15-year-old damage, but a 6-month-old hailstorm that may have done some damage, but not enough to warrant a claim, and they're going to sell it as a claim, right? So it's overcoming a lot of those obstacles, but documentation is always going to be the number one thing. The more you document it, the better you structure your argument, and understanding where you fit into the process too, right? Where the carrier can't deny you saying, I believe that this is damage based on my years of experience, and this is what it would cost for me to fix it. If you live in that bubble, you're fine all day long. It's when you start arguing code and ordinance. It's when you start arguing, well, the policy should say this, but you're not allowed to legally interpret the policy. So training your guys on identifying appropriate damage, how to set the right expectation with the homeowners, and then having some sort of ancillary in their back pocket, whether it's a public adjuster or a lawyer, like knowing that it can go there and not just being so stuck in their head of like, oh, I want to handle this on my own. A good PA or lawyer will tell you, hey, send this email and let's see what happens. I'll help you write it. I don't need to be involved in this. I don't need to get paid for sending one email, right? So it's about working together and having good pieces of the puzzle that all fit together to properly take care of the homeowner, but not putting those blinders on where their rent's due and they're like, I gotta sell this roof.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So.
Well, and I mean, and that's one thing that roofing contractors have. We've done it to ourselves where we think that every single roof ought to be paid for by the insurance company. And like, we could swap stories for hours, but it's just the amount of roofs that I've got on that said, hey, so-and-so said there was hail damage. And I'm like, I've been in this neighborhood multiple times and never found any hail damage. Right. Then I get up there and I see where the heaviest trafficked area up the roof is. And I was like, did they show you any of these pictures? They're like, yeah, I did. I was like, yeah, they did. I was like, yeah, that's literally from people climbing right here. Like, that's right along the gutter. That's a steep pitch right there. They're grabbing that gutter, climbing up there on that peak, and then climbing up to the next. And they're like, no way. You know, so, no, I mean, that's one thing that I train my guys on. But the worst part is then every once in a while you have an insurance adjuster that'll come out from a carrier and just approve a roof from the ground because there's a dent in the gutter that was from a kid throwing a rock. Well,
and there's different types of adjusters too, right? And so I had a large claim in Ohio just last week that I called the contractor and I said, listen, the kid that's coming out here, and I say kid because I had never met him, but he just sounded young on the phone. I was like, this kid's coming out here. I need to understand he's a third-party adjuster. He has no authority to buy this. I said, so when he tells you, hey, I'm going to take care of this, don't take it as the gospel, right? And to your point, there are times that carrier adjusters, not TPAs, will come out and they'll look at a roof and be like, yeah, okay. There's no rhyme or reason to it, right? And like I tell a lot of people, like I'm a disabled vet, dealing with homeowners insurance is like dealing with the VA. Like it really just depends on who answers the phone, who gets assigned to your thing, because what time of day is it? Because he may be a little more amenable first thing in the morning than he is on his 6th or 8th roof. It also depends on if it's a storm and they're sending in CAT adjusters, because if they're CAT adjusters, they literally put jobs on Indeed, be like, do you want to make 50 grand this year? We'll train you up in 2 weeks. And these people don't even know what shingles are.
Yes.
You know, and so you get a kid. I mean, being a contractor first helps me a lot on the PA side, because I understand. I don't practice it every day, so there's a lot of things that have changed over the last 10 or 15 years that I'm not aware of, but general means and methods I get. And also we live in IRC and IBC so much that like we're at least aware of a lot of these changes. The amount of adjusters that we've coached. I mean, I've walked on roofs, flat roofs, that guys are like, oh, this TPO, this, and the whole time we're sitting here looking at it going, this is EPDM or PVC. Or not the roof system that you said we're standing on. And then they don't understand what the levels are. It's like, is it DENS deck and then ISO and then metal decking, or is it concrete? Like, they are willfully unaware, because the carrier knows that if they send somebody ignorant out and they commit to something, they can always fall back on, oh, well, that person doesn't have the level of experience or credential to make that commitment on our behalf. So they do that on purpose. But that's, to your point, is that it's happened because for the last 10 years, every contractor in the country has been like, every roof needs to be bought and paid for by the insurance. Right. So it's a constant battle.
So just so the homeowners are kind of aware that are watching this, so you have your independent adjusters. So like some of the carriers will send out somebody that works directly for them nationwide, you know, whatever that looks like. And then State Farm around here does both, where they send out an independent. And like you said, pretty much the independent is just taking notes.
Most of the time, your field adjuster is literally just doing that. They're just picture takers.
Yes.
The desk adjuster is the one that's going to be the one that makes a decision. Until you get into like an EGA. So they have executive general adjusters.
Okay.
And those guys usually have a fiduciary amount that they can write for.
Yep.
But if it exceeds that dollar amount for them, then it's going back to a desk adjuster anyway. So.
Well, the crazy thing is, like, when I got in this business in like 16, State Farm used to have printers in their vans.
Yep.
And they would write checks.
Yeah.
They'd, you know, what we call scope of loss, but the estimate to the homeowner would fill that out, cut a check.
Yep.
And heck, I've got to know some of them that they would say, hey, if the customer will sign a contract, we'll release all the money right now. All of it.
Yeah, that's how it was when I started. I loved it back then.
Yeah, and like, amazing. You know, and I would team the homeowner up, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're using you. You've been out here 3 times or whatever, you know. And as a sales guy, that was great, because I was collecting practically all the money. Sometimes I'd go ahead and get the deductible right then. So the job was paid for before we even started it, you know. But
it's not like that now.
I ran into a guy like that last year.
Really?
I said, do you have a printer there? He goes, yeah, I do. So I was surprising. So I didn't know if State Farm was going back to that.
There's still, again, it's some of it's tenure, right? Some of these, if it's somebody who's been there, but they're working a lot of those guys out because they cost more, right? I know a lot of carrier adjusters who are moving over to the PA side because the money's good on the PA side. And if anybody tells you it's not, they're lying, right? Like, everybody's in this business to make money,
right?
So.
Right.
Every state has a different fee level, but we started our firm in Texas, which was capped at 10%. So we charged 10%, and that's the low. There's some states that go up to 30. There's a couple of states with no cap. And I think you guys are 20 or 25 here, but we don't charge over 10 no matter where we work in the country. If I have $1 million claim, I make 100 grand on that. We have PAs that work for us that make 150, 200 grand, and they go, I'm cool. And they go screw off for the rest of the year.
Right. If
people tell you they're not in it for the money, you're crazy. The reason I say all that is because a lot of these carrier adjusters who have been working for State Farm, Allstate, the Big Five, for the last 10 or 15 years are at 150, 200 grand a year. And they're going, we can get better result out of somebody we're paying 50 grand a year by cycling in new blood and getting rid of some of these old timers. And so they're doing that. A lot of these guys are getting along that way, but I think those guys still exist. I haven't run across a guy with a check printer in a long time. I've had guys who have the ability to commit to a check on site, but they're usually on commercial claims. But I have not seen one with a check printer in their van in a long time. Also haven't seen a State Farm van in a long time.
Yeah. Around here, we had a bigger claim, a tornado damaged house, and that was a State Farm claim. And I think it was 6 different adjusters that we dealt with.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The last one was end up being somebody from Richmond, Centerville area. And because the first, of course, one was a cat adjuster or catastrophic, where, like you said, they pump a bunch of people in this area to get through the claims, you know. Well, and
I work a lot of. We've worked hurricanes every year for. I think I've done 13 or 14 hurricanes now. And if you think it's bad when a tornado rips through a small town in Indiana,
right.
Go to Naples, Florida after a Cat 4 hits, and then watch it flood with these kids who, and I say kids, I'm just being disrespectful, I guess, but these young adjusters who just got their name badge and business cards.
Yep.
And 2 weeks ago were working at a hair salon or whatever. Like I kid you not, I hired estimators after was it Irma, the last big one that hit New Orleans, and because we got hired to do the entire Catholic diocese and just estimating, and so I put out solicitations for estimators, and I had these 2 girls that come in, and they're like, one was changing tires at a tire shop 2 weeks prior to that. And then one had, she was, no kidding, working at a hair salon, saw an ad for Allstate or somebody, went through their training, and then didn't get assigned to anything. So she was just kind of sitting on her thumbs. And so I hired her to come in and just scope. That's all I needed them to do, just go take pictures and stuff. But that's the type of people that they're bringing in. And it's not that those people are bad people. Right. They're not the expert that when you get this false sense of security when somebody gets out of a truck and they're in a State Farm shirt or whatever. You're like, oh, this person has my best interest in mind. They don't, unfortunately, because one of the first few things that they teach the carrier, and same thing on our exams, the law of large numbers, right? If we can deny 80% of claims or undervalue, most people are going to go, okay, that's what I get. And that 20% that might actually fight, I might have to pay out on 5% of those. Right. Playing the numbers game, and it always works to the house's advantage, right? They're in this to make money, and you know that's something that we fight with all the time, especially on the public adjuster side. Is these guys were like, well, I know my agent Jim. He's been in the community for 50 years, and Jim has no bearing on whether your claim gets bought or your rate. Yep. He gets a set list of rates based on your zip code that he can offer you, and then you get to pick and choose. Do you want to pay for a larger deductible or a smaller deductible? But he also he gets a bonus based on how many people don't file claims. So he's interested in you not filing claims, unfortunately.
I had a very honest agent, and I won't say what town because we're in small towns, but it was Greensburg got smoked. I won't say the agent. Greensburg got smoked with hail a few years ago, and it was like August, September, and you know, like
season hail.
Yeah, so some people, especially by the time you circle through that stuff, you know, I had a guy call me and say, "Hey, Bob, I know you're working with so and so, and if they have a claim worthy of filing," he said, would you please file it this year? He goes, because I've lost my ass this year. He goes, I'd like to make money next year. But I appreciate that person because they didn't say not to file it. He just said, please get it on the books from this year, you know.
And unfortunately, and good on him. Right. But a lot of times the agents don't even know what's in their policy half the time. Yeah. The policies that they're selling.
Right.
You know, and so like you said, that was an August, September hailstorm. There are times that these events happen and time goes by before the insured even realizes that something happened, and they're like, oh, I can't call in a claim now. You can. Right. Your policy says within a reasonable time frame, usually related to discovery. Yep. So the point that you notice there's an issue is equally as important to the point that it happened, right? And that's something that gets lost. And then the whole idea of, this is probably a nugget that if I could leave one and walk away, you getting 3 bids does nothing for your insurance claim process. Right. It gives the carrier the ability to pay for the cheapest one. Right. if you're paying for it cash out of your own pocket, by all means, go get all the bids in the world. But if your carrier is paying for it, and the amount of times I've had this argument with homeowners drives me bananas. We have a claim right now. I'll give you an example in Utah. It's a $1.2 million claim. It's a condo complex, right? The carrier committed to 1.2. The guy who's like the head of everything, the HOA out there, goes, "Well, I can get this done for $300,000 or $400,000. I'm like, "I don't care. You have to spend 1.2. And he's like, "Well, I just don't think these guys should charge that much." Doesn't matter. The carrier's saying, "I'm giving you 1.2 to do this. You have to pay 1.2. And if you don't, you have to give the balance back." Meaning you may not physically do it. They're just not going to reissue it to you on the back end. Right. But if they say it's $1 million, it's $1 million.
Right.
Pay $1 million. They want you to go get bids so they can say that it's 300,000, right? So if your adjuster ever tells you to go get 3 bids, just go pick a contractor.
Right.
And just stick with that one and be like, "I'm not getting 3 bids," because there's nothing in your policy, any policy I've ever read in my career has ever said you're required to get 3 bids. That's just the carrier's way of, because that's what happens with cars, right? Like they go, you can take it to Gerber Collision, you can take it to, 3 or 4 of these other ones, and whichever one's the cheapest is who they're going to pay. So don't get 3 bids. Just pick a contractor and move on.
I was going to say, one thing I try to tell homeowners, that they want to interview a few contractors and feel which one is going to represent them the best or do the best quality. Because that's another thing I used to tell, homeowners, like, yeah, if the insurance is paying for it, you got to pay your deductible no matter what. Yes. You might as well pick a reputable contractor. You might as well pick a contractor with maybe the best warranty in your opinion.
Well, I saw your video, the one that has this says make sure they have insurance. Step 1.
Yes.
Like that's it.
Yes.
Because you guys actually have contractor laws here. Like you go over to Ohio, there's no contractor laws. So that guy who's up there doing your roof may have been a painter last week. Right. Like I'm a huge fan of regulatory agencies in the capacity of saying, if somebody's going to come do work on something, electric, HVAC, construction, whatever it is, like I want that person to be licensed because I want to be able to hold them liable if they make a mistake, right? And there's so many states that have no license requirements for general contracting, which is crazy to me. These people go put up a house. They could build you a house and not be licensed to do it. That's nuts. They may have all the experience in the world, but I can't. There's nothing that says that they ever learned the trade that I'm asking them to do. And so when I saw your video, and I remember looking back at it going, "Oh, these are really good points," because it's right. You may not mesh with every contractor that sets foot under your doorstep, but they also don't need to give you a dollar amount if your insurance is paying for it. That's huge. That's really good advice.
Well, and I had a customer one time that the neighbor's house caught on fire. So his vinyl siding, I mean, this was in a neighborhood that the houses weren't much more further apart than us. And kudos to that. It was a State Farm claim. He told the customer, go interview a couple contractors, whichever one you like, have them send you an estimate. And fortunately the guy picked me and everything. But I mean, that is a hurdle that, we try to jump over. But also one thing that I try to do on the roofing contractor end is I try to have trained guys out there. There's too many people on our end that, they were changing tires last week and now they're out there representing. You don't know how many times I could get a job to represent somebody because I was like, here's my experience. Here's what I've done. Here's the customers I've helped. Make sure whoever you're talking else to, ask them what their experience looks like. Right. Because, I mean, there's known guys that tell everybody there's hail damage. And I feel like a third of my job sometimes was going out saying, actually, there isn't hail damage. I said, this is wind damage, but I said, this isn't hail damage, you know. Now, speak a little bit on that. So, Indiana, you got hail and wind are kind of your two main claims.
And you guys keep them separate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, because I've had adjusters, because what I always ask homeowners, I always tell homeowners to call it in as storm damage.
Yeah.
So it's a little vague because I have been on a roof before and the adjusters say, well, there's not enough wind damage here to buy this, but if you would have called it in as hail, I would have bought it on hail. Now they got to go file a separate claim.
Yeah. So which is going to get a new adjuster and everything.
New adjuster, new deductible.
So because the way Indiana keeps them separate, so there are states that there's hail claims, there's wind claims, and then there's wind and hail claims.
Okay.
Why anybody would file a wind or a hail when wind and hail collectively exist blows my mind. But the claim process for those is essentially the same, right? It should be for any covered peril. But like what you were just saying is, if you call it in under wind, then they're going to come and treat it as such. If you call it under hail, they're going to treat it as such. The homeowner's never expected to be educated in the means and methods of construction or meteorology. Let's just call it what it is, right? So if they were, they'd probably do that as a profession. So again, this is where the ambiguity conversation comes in. If the expectation is that you're not educated on what a shingle looks like when a 60-mile-an-hour wind hits it, or what type of shingle do you have on your roof? Do you have a 3-tab or a 30-year or an impact resistant, whatever? Like, if you don't know, then you can't be faulted. Like, this is one of those times in life where being ignorant could actually work to your advantage. We enjoy that too. There's a lot of times we'll leave the description of lost blank on a contract and send it in. And when the carrier calls, sometimes they'll just open their mouth and be like, "You calling about the September event?" Like, yes, we are. As a matter of fact, because if they already have it in their brain that they're coming out to inspect something that's related to an event that caused damage in other places, you're at a little bit of an advantage. But what we don't want to have happen is the insured put their foot in their mouth. We don't want the insured to diminish the potential value of what their claim is, because they're saying something that may be relative but might not be accurate. And so it's not bad practice necessarily to just write storm damage, because which part of the storm damaged your house? Was it the rain? Was it the hail? Was it the wind? Did you get struck by lightning? You don't know. So it works to the advantage of the homeowner to kind of be as ignorant and let somebody with the experience and expertise kind of lead that charge. But I think that's also where a lot of these guys get kind of screwed by their carrier too, is they're just going, they want to make sure, especially men, we just have that thing where it's like, well, I have to know. I got to know how to change the oil in my car and fix this and do that. And I should be able to climb up on the roof. You know how many homeowners I've seen get up on roofs in boots like this? And, and I'm like, you should get down, sir.
Right.
Like, stop. You're on an 812 3-tab. Like, you're going to slip and fall and hurt yourself. And they're like, no, I got it. And I'm like, you need to get your own ladder then, because I'm not letting you get on this roof on my ladder. But there's that machismo about it. And like, well, I have to handle this. Be like, sometimes just knowing what you don't know means worlds and worlds of difference. So,
well, and especially around here when there's a tornado, there's almost always hail within so many miles of a tornado. So you genuinely could have, both hail and wind, damage.
Yeah, and let them come out and determine which is the worst that happened to your home, right? I mean, there's no fault in that. We get again, back to hurricanes, like tornadoes come in statistically right after hurricanes. Almost every hurricane that's ever come and hit landfall, within 24 hours, there's tornadoes that follow it. Nobody knows that because everybody's dealing with the damn hurricane, right? Hailstorms are the same thing. When tornadoes come through, they almost always produce some sort of hail because of just the way that the barometric changes. And we spend a lot of time going on it because we have partnerships with like the Building Experts Institute down in Nashville, and those guys are phenomenal when it comes to dissecting how these things happen.
Yes.
And some of the conversations that I've got to sit in, and I'm just sitting there like I'm like in a candy store.
Yep.
Like, I'll probably never use some of that information, but if in the event I need it, I'm like, look at this thing I've got. It's not the burden of proof is not on the insured. The burden of proof is on the carrier. And so making them make the determination is what you want to do, but it also has to be within the confines of what the policy says. And that's where it gets a little bit muddy. But that's where, again, if you're a contractor, very few contractors do I know that don't have a PA or a lawyer that they can at least call and have a conversation with. Whether they actually ever use that person or not, it's a completely different story. But it's always good to have those people in your pocket so you can call and be like, hey, what if this happened? Or, hey, I got this weird thing. I'm like, and I take those calls all the time. And I'm like, just send this email, call them back and tell them X, Y, and Z. And then depending on how they respond, we'll gauge our next step. But having that information is great.
come back soon for part 2.